But European leaders are worried the Trump administration does not have Ukraine's best interests in mind.
In a surprising move, Russia has completely ignored the need to invite European countries to the upcoming Ukraine peace talks, disregarding usual diplomatic practices. As tensions rise, key Russian and U.S. officials are preparing for an important meeting in Saudi Arabia, while Europe is left out and upset. Is this a smart move, or a hint that Moscow is getting more harsh and serious in talks?
Seeking to further undermine Ukraine's sovereignty, claiming more Ukrainian land, and Moscow demanding new elections in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials say Moscow seeks a pro-Russian puppet government in Kyiv.
Russia has clearly rejected any European role in the Ukraine peace talks, blaming Western countries for escalating the conflict instead of working towards peace. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made a strong statement before an important meeting between Russia and U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia, while European leaders rushed to react in Paris with an emergency summit. The action shows a big change in the balance of power in the ongoing war in Ukraine, as Washington's direct talks with Moscow leave European leaders feeling left out and worried about what this means. At a press conference in Moscow, Lavrov stated that European countries should not be involved in the negotiations, raising doubts about their intentions and previous shortcomings in addressing the Ukraine crisis. "I'm not sure what they would do when they sit down to talk. If they plan to sit at the negotiating table just to keep the war going, then why invite them?" he said, strongly emphasizing the Kremlin's view that Western Europe cares more about extending the conflict than finding a way to stop it. Lavrov was very critical, saying that Europe had its chance to fix tensions back in 2014 when Russia took Crimea and supported pro-Russian separatists in eastern Ukraine. He believes that the European Union did not take the right actions, making its current role not needed. His comments directly challenged the group, which has always called for stronger sanctions and military help for Ukraine. As Europe reacts to Lavrov's clear refusal, everyone is now looking at Riyadh, where important discussions between Russian and U.S. officials took place. Kremlin officials said that Lavrov and Vladimir Putin's diplomatic advisor Yuri Ushakov went to Saudi Arabia for the meeting. Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson for the Kremlin, said that the discussions were aimed at restoring the whole complex of Russian-American relations and also looked at possible talks for a resolution regarding Ukraine. Peskov suggested that there might be a chance to set up a meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and U.S. President Donald Trump, which could change the current diplomatic situation significantly. The discussions in Saudi Arabia have caught many people off guard, especially in Europe, where leaders have seen the U.S. as a reliable partner in their joint efforts to back Ukraine. Germany, reacting to the unexpected diplomatic move, called on the U.S. and Russia to find a lasting peace. A representative from the German Foreign Ministry carefully expressed approval of the direct talks, saying, "Having direct communication between the Americans and the Russians is a positive step if it aims at achieving a lasting peace." In the middle of the growing global tension, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky seems to have been kept in the dark about the talks between the U.S. and Russia. Zelensky said in a statement to Interfax Ukraine that Kiev didn't know about the talks, showing clear frustration about being left out of discussions that affect Ukraine's future. "We don't know anything about them," Zelensky said clearly, adding, "Our country cannot accept anything or any agreements about us without our involvement. We won't accept those agreements." His words highlight the increasing worries in Kiev that strong countries are talking about Ukraine's future without including it, sparking fears of possible secret agreements that might not be in the country's best interest. Zelensky is going to Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, right after the meeting between Russian and U.S. officials. His spokesperson said that the trip was long planned and has extra stops in the United Arab Emirates and Turkey. There are no planned meetings with Russia or U.S. officials during his visit, which makes it clear that Ukraine is not part of the important talks. Zelensky has been talking with regional leaders, recently meeting with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in Abu Dhabi. The UAE has been important in helping with the exchange of prisoners between Russia and Ukraine, and Zelensky pointed out its efforts in saving many lives. In their meeting, the leaders signed a document for working together on the economy and talked about current humanitarian problems, but there was not much sign that the UAE could affect the upcoming talks between the U.S. and Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine criticized the Trump administration's negotiating methods, expressing strong disapproval over the exclusion of Ukrainians from discussions about their own country's future. The meeting in Riyadh wrapped up with the deal to set up teams to talk about ending the war in Ukraine and improving relations. There were positive remarks and promises for stronger connections between the United States and Russia, which has been a shift that Kiev and European allies have found concerning. Mr. Zelensky showed his disagreement with not being included in the talks by calling off his trip to the Saudi capital. "We cannot make decisions about ending the war in Ukraine without Ukraine being involved, and we cannot impose any condition," Mr. Zelensky stated from Turkey, where he was visiting as part of a planned trip to the Middle East. "We didn't get an invite to this Russian-American meeting in Saudi Arabia. It caught us off guard, and I believe it surprised a lot of other people too." He said Ukraine found out about the plans for the meeting through the news. Mr. Zelensky mentioned that he planned to meet with American officials after the meeting in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, during a previously arranged state visit to the country. "I'm not sure who will stick around, who will go, or who is thinking about heading somewhere. Honestly, I don't mind," he said. "I don't want random events, and that's why I will not go to Saudi Arabia." Ukraine has been looking for discussions that would ensure its safety from future attacks by Russia, along with a promise of joining NATO or having peacekeepers sent to the conflict area. Ukraine has asked countries to think about holding trials for Russian war crimes and providing compensation for a conflict that has destroyed entire cities and caused many civilian deaths and injuries, along with around 1 million soldiers affected on both sides. Those types of requests were not part of the talks in Riyadh, where American negotiators instead highlighted the amazing chances that would arise from a better relationship with Moscow, according to Secretary of State Marco Rubio. However, Mr. Zelensky emphasized that any agreement made without Ukraine should not be forced upon Ukraine. The comments showed a change from Mr. Zelensky, who has been careful in dealing with Trump administration statements, steering clear of direct criticism. He has given compliments in recent talks and interviews, saying over the weekend to NBC that President Trump might be able to push Russia into an agreement because the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, was afraid of him. As the meeting in Riyadh took shape, he made his criticism of the negotiating process clearer. In a chat with the German broadcaster ARD on Monday, Mr. Zelensky mentioned that the United States was looking for a fast ceasefire by saying things that Putin really likes. The goal of the American negotiators, he said, was to quickly set up a meeting between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin and declare a ceasefire. But what they want, just a pause in the fighting, is not a win, Mr. Zelensky said. He stated that the United States and European countries should first define the conditions for security in Ukraine after the war, and he has emphasized that Russia must agree to security guarantees to stop any violations or a return to conflict. Mr. Zelensky compared the discussions between Russia and the U.S. that began in Saudi Arabia to the talks that led to the end of America's military involvement in Afghanistan, which allowed the Taliban to regain control after 2 decades of American conflict. The United States talked straight to the Taliban, leaving out the Afghan government that had American support. "I don't believe anyone cares about Afghanistan 2.0, Mr. Zelensky said in an interview shown before the Saudi talks wrapped up. "We think back to what took place in Afghanistan when the Americans left quickly. He mentioned that the pullout was a case of what can happen when someone doesn't finish, doesn't think, and rushes out." Mr. Zelensky has been responding to claims from Mr. Putin that he is not a rightful leader since Ukraine has not held elections, which is not possible while under martial law. When asked if the United States backs Russia's request for Ukraine to hold elections before a final peace deal, Mr. Trump stated that it was his administration pushing for Ukraine to have new elections soon, not Russia. "Yeah, I think that, if they want a place at the table, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, it's been a while since we've had an election," he said. "That's not just a Russia thing, it's something that comes from me and many other countries too. Ukraine is facing a really tough time." Actually, Russia and the United States are the only important countries asking for elections to happen soon in Ukraine. Mr. Trump said that Mr. Zelensky's approval rating went down because of the damage in Ukraine and wrongfully implied that the Ukrainian president was responsible for the destruction caused by Russia. After the talks in Riyadh ended, there was no quick change in the fighting. In Kiev, Ukraine's capital, anti-aircraft gunfire was heard as they tried to stop Russian drones about 7 hours later. The United States has been the biggest single provider of military and financial help to Ukraine since Russia's full invasion in 2022, although the European Union countries together have given more. A few leaders from European countries, who were also not part of the discussions, met on Monday in Paris to see what kind of military help or peacekeeping forces European nations could offer to support a potential ceasefire. Ukraine relies on the United States for satellite information and air defenses, including Patriot interceptors, which are its main protection against Russian ballistic missiles. Ground troops rely less on American weapons as fighting has changed during the war. Ukraine's homemade drones that explode are now causing most of the injuries to Russian soldiers. During the war, Ukraine has battled against Russia's much bigger and better armed army to a near halt, although it is now clear that Russia has the upper hand. Since November 2022, around half of 1% of Ukrainian land has been taken in fighting that is mostly steady but still intense. Russia is slowly moving ahead in a violent offensive in the Donbas area of eastern Ukraine. Right now, it's obvious that neither side will come out on top in this war, Mr. Zelensky said on Tuesday. Russia wanted this, but it didn't work out. No one had faith in Ukraine, but we showed our strength and defended our freedom at a great cost in the lives of our soldiers and our people. This shows that we need to move towards talking things out, but it should result in a fair peace. Mr. Zelensky mentioned that he wishes to come to a deal with the Trump administration to trade some profits from natural resources for military help. An idea from the Trump administration wanted to take half of the money the government makes from natural resources, according to someone who knows about the idea. Mr. Zelensky hesitated about the deal, stating that it did not include any security promises from the United States in return. This is a really important issue for us, and we are very interested in signing an agreement with the United States, Mr. Zelensky said in a video call with reporters in Kiev on Monday from Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Mr. Zelensky mentioned that Europe was also keen on putting money into Ukraine. I mentioned to our American partners that we have other offers from Europe too, he said. Mr. Zelensky mentioned that any agreement regarding resources in Ukraine should take into account other supporters of the Ukrainian war effort. With Europe left out, Ukraine pushed aside, and the U.S. talking directly with Russia, the meeting in Saudi Arabia could change how the war is being discussed. If Washington and Moscow can agree on some small points, it might open the door for bigger diplomatic talks, even if it means less influence for Europe. Still, doubt is strong. Lavrov has made it clear that Russia will not give up any land it has taken in eastern and southern Ukraine, saying that this idea should not even be thought about during talks. If Russia keeps this position, then talks for peace might not work, or even worse, could create more problems between allies who want different things. As everyone looks on, what happens in these important discussions could decide if the war in Ukraine moves towards a solution or gets stuck in a longer fight with changing partnerships and unexpected results. And with that, we conclude this video. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to subscribe for more updates on the latest in global economics and politics. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you can be notified every time we post a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.